Should you main Resto Druid in Season 2 of The War Within? You guys liked my Mistweaver video so much and you asked a lot of questions specifically about Resto Druid, so I feel like a lot of you are considering maining it in Season 2. Now, I get it, there is a lot of hype around two specific healers that you're probably hearing about a bunch, but you just want to hear about the other few that aren't getting as much hype. So that's what we're going to do is I'm going to cover some of these that you guys want me to cover and hopefully help you make your decision on what you should main in Season 2. Now, before we get into this video, I have to say this, but I or anyone else cannot or should not make this decision for you. Play what you want to play. My role here is to help you make that decision. I'm going to lay out a lot of things that I think through when trying to decide on my main, and talk about the rotation and some of the pain points of Restoration Druid in Season 2 to help you make your decision. In order to do this, I'm going to try to lay out for you what it's going to be like maining Resto Druid in Season 2. So first, let's talk about the rotation and gameplay patterns. And I can say, as someone who has mained Resto Druid for a very long time in the past, coming into Season 2 of The War Within, it feels night and day how much better and how much more fluid, no pun intended, this spec feels than it used to. Your rotation is so much better with the mastery changes, where if someone gets a random dot applied to them or a big cast onto them and now all of a sudden one person needs a lot more healing, the tools that you have as a Resto Druid are legitimately night and day from what they used to be. You have 2 charges of Swiftman, 2 charges of Nature Swiftness. Your Nature Swiftness healing is even more. Your regrowths are packing a punch. You do so much more spot healing. And on top of that, I've mentioned the mastery change. It feels so much better if you need to swap your life bloom from like yourself or from your tank to one of your DPS players in an instant to get that bigger spot heal onto that target. I cannot stress you how much better it feels with this mastery change. And speaking of that change, one of the most frustrating things as a Resto Druid is how much overhealing you have to do in order to play this spec correctly in Mythic Plus Pug environments. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you've heard or at least experienced the fact that Resto Druids have to keep blanketing HOTS before the damage happens or in anticipation of just random amounts of damage. Well, this change has honestly made that less punishing. If that damage happens and you are caught with your pants down with 0 HOTS out, now all of a sudden your Efflorescence plus Life Bloom or plus Wild Growth is so much more AoE healing than you would expect. On top of that, I've already mentioned the single target healing. If that damage hits when you're not expecting it, you don't have your Rejuves, your Wild Growth, your Efflorescence down, you move your Life Bloom to that target and you cast a Regrowth, it is so much more healing than you would expect. All in all, the healing changes feel so much better. Yes, you aren't getting so much hype right now because the numbers aren't exactly where you would probably hope they would be coming into a new season, but keep in mind that it is PTR and the problem with this spec just being its numbers is honestly a great scenario. It's something that you should hope for as a player because numbers can always be adjusted and they likely will. In fact, coming into a season like this where your numbers are looking a little bit low is honestly a great spot to be in because you're primed for one of those number tweaking buffs. As far as raid goes, the build looks very similar to what you're running in Season 1, where you're just coding your rejuves, doing wild growth before damage or right during that damage, and then regrowth spam to capitalize on that abundance healing, like giant juicy regrowths, sniping healing left and right. You have a 1-minute flourish, your Convoke is super strong. There's a lot of build diversity and like a couple talent tweaks that you can take in your raid build. But as far as build diversity goes for your Mythic Plus build, how they've swapped up the damage talents or split up your damage profile is very, very nice. Because if you're a more aggressive player, you want to be pushing those high keys and pulling your weight as a healer doing a bunch of damage. I know I'm not going to talk about damage too long, but I know there's just so many changes that have hit their damage profile that I have to mention it. If you want to catweave, catweaving feels phenomenal. If you need to kick a cast, you can kick it while in Druid stance. It'll quick swap you into cat form. You do like a thrash and a rake and a rip, and then swap back into your healing stance by casting a wild growth on your allies when that damage is about to hit. It feels so fluid swapping in and out of cat form. You do very nice damage. Now, if you're someone who doesn't really care for cat weaving, maybe you want to stay out and ranged and stay out of that melee and all that melee damage except for when you need to kick, you can go a magical damage route. But I will say, I just have to be completely honest in this video to let you know what to expect. the magical damage profile does seem a little hindered or a little low like this. These damage numbers to me are not performing super well, but for what you're doing, like the investment that you're putting into this build or the globals that you're investing into damage, it's not that bad. Like if you just do a Sunfire and some Moonfires and let your Treants do the rest of the Moonfire carrying, maybe the occasional Star Surge, you're getting fine damage out of it. If you want to see better numbers, you do have to commit your Convoke in your Boomkin form to get better damage that way. Same with your Cat form. If you want to get some big numbers, you do have to commit your biggest cooldown in Convoke. And that is a pretty big pain point. I kind of wish that you could have two separate Convokes at some points, like one for Cat form, one for Boomkin form, and then one for Druid form, you know, like that way you're not investing your biggest healing cooldown. But for the most part, the damage feels good for the amount of globals that you're having to spend on it. And if you do go cat weaving, you can spend more globals on damage, get much more damage out of it. As far as your major cooldowns in Mythic Plus, you still have Convoke as kind of like your go-to. It's a very short cooldown that you try to save for those big damage instances. But nowadays, you do have the option, at least, to take Tranquility. I mean, it's always been there, but the changes to Tranquility make it a lot more viable in Mythic Plus. However, it's still, in my testing at least, is not quite there yet. However, if there are those dungeons this tier, like think of like your season, your Halls of Infusion third bosses, those bosses where you just need another cooldown to cycle, or those big rot constant damage bosses, you technically can invest that one talent point into Tranquility, and it will help smooth that over, but like I said, it's not quite the cooldown that you would need in a Mythic Plus environment. It does still suck that your Photosynthesis and Flourish share a talent node, because man, it would be so nice to have both of those. But honestly, Photosynthesis is so strong, especially now that you're moving around those life blooms a little bit more aggressively and making sure that you're always having those two applied, such that you don't really miss Flourish in a lot of instances. And like I've said already, your regrowths are so powerful, they hit so hard. If you have that blanket of hots, your regrowths can carry a lot of mechanics themselves. So having a lack of like a big diverse pool of cooldowns is okay because of just how strong your base kit and your base spells are. So if that entices you as a player, you don't have to line up all of these cooldowns for mechanics. You just have to make sure you always have those hots blanketed before those mechanics happen. Then that is a very fun change of pace from some of the other healers that need those cooldowns to survive those mechanics. On top of that, you do have Symbiotic Relationship as one of your new buttons, and it's super cool. I mean, yeah, it's not like fun. It doesn't make the spec more fun because it's a button you press as soon as you and your tank are alive. You just put it on your tank, and then all of a sudden, any healing that you do to either target is shared slightly to the other target. So it does do a nice job of keeping the tank alive or helping them sustain bigger pools because you're just rolling more hots on them, rolling hots on yourself to help them. All of a sudden, your double life bloom on you and the tank is just a lot stronger. And then I can't not mention the Treants. The Treants are still there, which some of you guys don't like the Treant playstyle. Some of you really do like them. And from my testing, I think the Treants are there currently, like the state that they're in is perfect for either side. If you love the Treants or you hate them, they're in a good middle ground. They're very strong and they help facilitate your healing as the player, but they don't make or break pools. Like you don't use these Treants as a cooldown unless you stack like all three charges for one big DPS mechanic. But these Treants, they facilitate what you, the player, are doing. So it's really nice because if you like using the Treants or you really like what they do for the spec, it's nice because you can still play with them and weave them into your rotation and they'll help you as the player. But if you don't like the Treants, you can kind of like bind them to other buttons and forget about them, and they'll just be helping you until you eventually do unbind them from other buttons and start working with them. But what I'm trying to say is they don't pull power from the rest of your build in order to make them have a spot, but they do add enough power to the rest of your build to where they're worth the spot, if that makes sense. So I really like where the Treants are at because I feel like they've found that middle ground between half of the player base that hates them and half that loves them. That's kind of the rotation and what you can expect depending on how you want to play the spec. Like I said, there's some variable choices that you can make as a player and kind of move around some of your power. However, what you can expect is like from an admin standpoint, I don't know how to kind of reference this, but when you're sitting there waiting to get into a queue, or like everything you're doing outside of playing the actual game or being in a key or in a raid environment, will you be earning a spot? And the good news is as a Resto Druid, you do bring a lot to the table, especially in like a Mythic Plus environment. You do bring Mark of the Wild, which raid groups need. If a raid doesn't have a Druid, you will be sought after. So you can earn your raid spot almost solely based on having Mark of the Wild. And then for Mythic Plus, the two healers that you're probably hearing a ton of hype around, neither of them have a B-res. And currently, it's not looking like Paladin, like Prop Paladin, is going to be like the end-all, be-all tank of next season. At least from what I've heard, there's going to be some more competition in the tank role. So if less groups have a Prop Paladin, then that is going to free up a spot in a Mythic Plus group where they need a B-res. And all of a sudden, you are sought after. Yes, you aren't getting as much hype as the other healers, but you do fulfill a role that is very much needed. So you do have some queues that are just going to be open for you, which means that yes, you might not get into every group that's looking for that meta comp, those annoying groups where it's like, I need the meta healer in order to time this +2. You guys know those groups. But for every other group, they're just going to be looking to fill the roles in their group, and you should have a good enough time, a quick enough time finding a group next season. On top of that, there are a few dungeons where you do have some very good utility as a druid. Namely, the biggest one that I can think of is Theater of Pain. I know that as a druid, you have like the best soothe in the game for that first guy, which is just a huge pain point in that dungeon because he's almost like unskippable. Basically, you have to fight him. A lot of times you like to pull him into the boss, and just having a druid in the comp to soothe that guy on cooldown is very nice. Now, I've talked about your competition with the other healers, but I do want to mention the competition with the other druid specs, because a lot of what you bring to the table, obviously these other druid specs bring as well. And currently on the PTR, it's looking like the two druid DPSs are looking pretty solid, so some groups might just have a druid already and might turn you down for that reason. But honestly, that's not really changing from season 1. Like, balanced druid was pretty sought after in Mythic Plus in season 1. So if you're used to that, if you're okay with accepting that as a player, then you have nothing to worry about in that department. But traditionally, one of the biggest strengths of Resto Druid is just being able to coat HOTS and just compete with rot damage. There is a bit of rot damage in this next dungeon pool, but for the most part, it's mostly burst damage. And one of the best changes that's happened throughout the War Within to Resto Druid is that you can compete with burst damage a lot better with your healing profile. Like I mentioned already, 2 charges of Nature Swiftness, 2 charges of Swift Mend. Your mastery allows you to get more out of less HOTS. Like, a lot of these changes are trying to shift you into the modern world. And as a player, I have had so much fun on my Resto Druid, and I look forward to like it being my primary alt next season because of how positive some of these changes are. So if you are considering playing Resto Druid, hopefully some of these considerations, hopefully some of these talking points that I thought of today have kind of helped you make that decision. But as always, if you have any more questions, or if you want to see me talk about another healer, like maybe you're considering Holy Priest or Resto Shaman, let me know that in the comments below, and I'll make sure and get back to you or make that video for you guys. But for the time being, thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully your decision in your main for Season 2 is going smoothly, and hopefully I can be along for that ride and help you make that decision if you're not fully there yet. But thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you for watching this video. You didn't have to click on my video, but I greatly appreciate it. And especially those of you who took the time to click the like button, make sure that you're subscribed. And thank you so much to the patrons of this channel for keeping this channel alive. I would not be here without you, able to live my dream. So thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this one. Until then, take care.